Core is back in the hot seat today. Take it from here.
A rational case for it. Thanks, Erica. I have been building a mental model for this one that I think you will love. Let us go. Rational case for it. Domain 5 carries 13% of your CISSP exam, and it is the domain that ties together everything humans do inside a system, who they are, what they are allowed to touch, rational case for it, and how you prove their identity before granting that access.
Identity and access management is not just a technical topic. It is the enforcement mechanism for every other control in the organization. Least privilege, separation of duties. Need to know all of those require a functioning identity and access management system underneath them.
Think of it like a hotel key system. The hotel has to know who you are at check-in, issue you the right key for your room and not others, and then take that key back when you check out. Identity and access management does exactly that for every system, every user, every day.
This video covers the foundation, the identity lifecycle, how identities are proven and registered, directory services like LDAP and Active Directory, single sign-on identity as a service, and federated identity management. Every concept here feeds into the deeper auth and access control topics that follow.
A ration of this video, you will understand how an identity is born, managed, and terminated, and why that full life cycle matters for the exam and for real-world security programs. Here is who is with me today.
I am excited to watch this one unfold. I will jump in when I cannot help myself.
Michael here. This is the kind of topic I could talk about for hours.
Hi, I'm River. I like connecting dots across different worlds. This is perfect for that.
Good to have everyone. Here we go.
Let us start with the life cycle itself. Scene 2 is where every identity and access management story begins. Every identity in a system has a life cycle. It begins, it changes over time, and it must end cleanly. The CISSP exam tests all 3 phases, with the most dangerous failure points often coming at the end.
Provisioning is the birth. A new employee joins, hours triggers a process, and accounts are created in the relevant systems with the access rights appropriate for their role. The key principle here: provision only what is needed, start with least privilege.
Management is everything in between: modifying access when roles change, running periodic access reviews, handling password resets, adding temporary elevated privileges for a project, and removing them after. Identity management is an ongoing operation, not a one-time event.
Rational case for it. And then there is deprovisioning, the phase organizations consistently get wrong. When someone leaves, their accounts must be disabled or deleted promptly. Every day an ex-employee account remains active is a day that credential can be used against you.
Orphaned accounts are active accounts with no current human owner. Someone left, their account was never closed, and now it sits open. These are prime targets for attackers because they are often not monitored and their owners are not around to notice the activity.
The exam will give you scenarios about access review. Core the process of periodically auditing who has what access and confirming it is still appropriate. When someone changes roles, say a developer becomes a manager, their old developer permissions should be reviewed and removed if no longer needed. That is called privilege accumulation or access creep, and access reviews are the cure.
Before you can manage an identity, you have to establish that the person claiming an identity is actually who they say they are. That is identity proofing, and it happens at the beginning of the life cycle before any credentials are handed over.
NIST Special Publication 863A defines identity assurance levels, which describe how rigorously an identity was verified. A rational case for it. This is worth knowing for the exam because it frames how confident you can be about a claimed identity.
Identity assurance level 1 is the weakest. The person self asserts their identity with no verification. Think of signing up for a free web service with just an email address. IL1 is appropriate for low-risk applications where the downside of a false identity is minimal.
IL2 requires remote identity verification, submitting a government-issued ID and having it checked against authoritative sources. You could do this online, but the identity is not just taken at face value. Most enterprise onboarding operates at roughly this level, Erica.
IL3 is the highest assurance level and requires in-person proofing. The applicant presents original documents to a trained verifier who physically checks them. This is what you see in high-security clearance environments, financial institutions with strict KYC requirements, and government identity programs.
A registration is the step that follows successful proofing. The verified identity is formally recorded in the system and bound to an authenticator, meaning a token, certificate, rational case for it, or credential that represents that identity going forward. Proofing without registration leaves the verified identity floating with nothing to use it with.
Identities have to live somewhere, and in most enterprises, that somewhere is a directory service. A directory is a specialized database optimized for reading identity and attribute information quickly. Think of it as the organization's identity phone book.
LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, is the standard protocol for querying and modifying directory services. It runs on port 380/9 for unencrypted connections. The encrypted version, LDAPS, runs on port 636 using transport layer security. Know both port numbers for the exam.
Active Directory is Microsoft's enterprise identity platform. It combines LDAP for directory access with Kerberos for authentication and provides centralized management of users, computers, groups, and policies across an entire organization. If you have ever logged into a corporate Windows machine, Active Directory was the engine behind that login.
Active Directory structures identity in a hierarchy. Forests contain domains. Domains contain organizational units, and organizational units contain objects, users, groups, computers, and other resources. Group policy objects apply security settings to OUs, which is how enterprises push baseline configurations across thousands of machines.
For the exam core, the key LDAP concepts are that it is RID optimized, meaning authentication lookups happen fast and that write operations are less frequent. Directory services are not general-purpose databases. They are designed to answer the question, who is this person, and what are their attributes thousands of times per second.
Unencrypted LDAP on port 380/9 transmits credentials in clear text, a serious risk on any network. Michael. LDAPS, or LDAP, with StarTL should always be used in production environments. Exam questions about directory service security often test whether you know to encrypt the channel.
Rational case single sign-on lets a user authenticate once and then move between multiple applications without re-entering credentials. From a user experience perspective, it feels seamless. From a security perspective, it is a trade-off that requires careful design.
The user logs in once, receives a session token, and that token is presented to each application they visit rather than forcing repeated authentication. The applications trust the token rather than independently verifying the user's credentials every time.
The benefits are significant. Users maintain fewer passwords, so they are more likely to choose strong ones and less likely to write them down. Administrators have a single point to control access revocation. Disable the single sign-on account and the user loses access to everything simultaneously.
But single sign-on also creates the single point of failure problem. If an attacker compromises the single sign-on provider's credentials or the token infrastructure, they gain access to every application connected to that single sign-on. River, the 2020 Okta breach, is the exam-ready case study here.
In 2022, Lapsus compromised an Okta support engineer's account. Because Okta is a single sign-on an identity provider used by hundreds of companies, a single compromised internal account created risk across all of Okta's customers. That is the blast radius of single sign-on compromise at scale.
In enterprise environments, single sign-on typically runs on Kerberos. For web and cloud environments, the standards are SAML 2.0 and OpenID Connect. We will go deep on both of those in episode 5.3. For now, a rational case for know that single sign-on is a centralization strategy with clear security implications on both sides of the ledger.
Identity as a Service (IDaaS) applies the cloud delivery model to identity management. Instead of running your own LDAP servers and single sign-on infrastructure on premises, you subscribe to a cloud provider that handles it for you.
IDaaS platforms like Okta, Microsoft Entra ID, and Ping Identity bundle single sign On multi-factor authentication, user provisioning access reviews, and often API security into a single cloud service. They are essentially the identity backbone for organizations that do not want to build and maintain that infrastructure themselves.
Rational case for it. From a future readiness standpoint, IDaaS is the direction enterprises are heading as workforces become distributed and applications move to the cloud. Rational case for an on-premises directory that only lives in your data center becomes a bottleneck. IDaaS scales globally without the organization building that infrastructure.
The risk conversation is critical for the exam. IDaaS shifts operational trust to a third party. The same shared responsibility model that applies to cloud computing applies here. The provider secures the platform and the underlying infrastructure, but the organization configures the policies, manages the users, and owns the data.
If the IDaaS provider is compromised or goes down, your organization's authentication may fail entirely. That is both a confidentiality risk and an availability risk. Organizations relying on IDaaS need to evaluate provider SLAs, incident response capabilities, and their own contingency procedures if the service is unavailable.
The exam framing for IDaaS is almost always about shared responsibility and vendor risk. If a question asks what the organization retains responsibility for when using IDaaS, the answer centers on policy configuration, user governance, and data handling decisions. The provider handles infrastructure. The organization handles identity policy.
Federated identity management extends trust beyond a single organization's boundaries. Instead of every organization running its own identity system and forcing users to maintain separate accounts everywhere, Federation allows organizations to accept identity assertions from trusted partners.
Rational for it. When you log into a third-party application using your Google or Microsoft account, that is Federation in action. Google or Microsoft acts as the identity provider. They assert who you are. Rationals for it. The third-party app is the service provider. It trusts that assertion and grants you access without requiring its own separate credentials.
The protocols that make this work are SAML 2.0 for enterprise and B2B federation, OAuth 2.0 for authorization delegation, and OpenID Connect, which adds authentication on top of OAuth. We will go deep on all three in episode 5.3. For now, know what role each plays.
Federation trust models describe how organizations establish the trust relationship. Cross-certification means both organizations independently verify and certify each other, bilateral trust. Trusted third party means both organizations trust a common third entity, like a certificate authority or identity broker, and that shared trust enables them to trust each other.
The security implications of Federation deserve attention, Erica. When you accept an external identity provider's assertions, you inherit whatever security posture they have. If their accounts are weakly protected and they assert to you that a user is verified, you have accepted a risk you did not independently assess. River's Okta case study from Scene 5 makes this concrete.
Rational case for it. Forget everything else from this scene. Remember this one. Federation is trust delegation. You are trusting another entity's verification of identity. Of that trust is only as good as the weakest link in the chain, which means vendor risk management for identity providers is a real security program requirement.
Here is the anchor for Domain 5 Part 1, Forget Everything Else. Remember this one thing, the identity lifecycle has 3 phases, and the most dangerous failures happen at the end. Orphaned accounts from missed deprovisioning are a consistently tested exam topic and a real-world vulnerability pattern.
On identity proofing, know the 3 assurance levels. IL1 is self-asserted with no verification. IL2 adds remote verification of real-world identity documents. IL3 requires physical in-person verification.
A rational case for it. Higher IL means stronger confidence in the claimed identity. The distinction matters on the exam when a question asks which proofing level is appropriate for a given risk environment.
On directory services, LDAP on port 389 transmits in cleartext. LDAPS on port 636 encrypts with transport layer security. The exam will test both port numbers and the security distinction between them. Never use unencrypted LDAP in production.
Single sign on is a centralization trade-off. It reduces password fatigue and simplifies access revocation, but creates a high-value target. A rational case for it. Compromise the single sign-on provider, and you compromise everything connected to it. The Okta breach in 2022 is the live case study for that exam question.
IDaaS follows the cloud shared responsibility model. The provider secures the platform. Your organization configures the policies and governs the users. Vendor risk management applies to identity providers the same way it applies to any critical cloud service.
And Federation is trust delegation. When you accept assertions from an external identity provider, you inherit their security posture. Know your identity providers, assess their controls, and understand the protocols. SAML 2.0 for Enterprise Federation, OpenEye Connect for modern authentication layers.
Drop a question in the comments. What is the identity management failure pattern you have seen most often in your organization? Orphaned accounts, no access reviews, or something else entirely?
Rational subscribe and keep the series going. Episode 5.2 dives into authentication factors, multi-factor authentication, biometrics, and the Okta breach in full detail. The future is built by the prepared. Stay ready. Rational case for okay, it is quiz time. Let's find out what's stuck. Think through each question carefully before you answer.
If you are getting real value from this series, show it with a like and a subscribe. We read every single comment.
A former employee's Active Directory account was never disabled after their departure 6 months ago. What is the primary risk classification for this account? The correct answer is B, orphaned account, an active credential with no current human owner, representing unauthorized access risk.
An organization configures its LDAP, directory service, to transmit queries on port 389. What is the primary security concern with this configuration? The correct answer is C, port 380. 9 uses unencrypted LDAP, transmitting credentials and directory data in clear text.
A company allows employees to access a partner organization's hours portal using their corporate credentials. The partner's system accepts an identity assertion from the company without requiring separate login. Which identity and access management concept best describes this arrangement? The correct answer is C, Federated identity management. The partner trusts the company's identity assertion across organizational boundaries.
A rational fork on the quiz. Here's what Domain 5 Part 1 locked in. The identity lifecycle has 3 phases: provisioning, management, and deprovisioning. Rational case for it. Orphaned accounts, active credentials with no human owner, are the most consistently tested failure in the deprovisioning phase.
Identity proofing uses 3 assurance levels from NIST 863A. IL1 is self-asserted with no verification. IL2 adds remote document verification. IL3 requires in-person proofing with a trained verifier.
Directory services LDAP on port 389 is cleartext, never use it in production. LDAPS on port 636 encrypts with transport layer security. Active Directory combines LDAP with Kerberos for enterprise identity management. Know both port numbers and the security distinction.
Single sign-on centralizes access and simplifies revocation but creates a single point of failure. IDaaS moves identity to the cloud under a shared responsibility model, and Federation extends trust across organizational boundaries. The strength of that trust is only as good as the identity provider you are federating with.
Next video is CISSP 5.2 authentication methods. We go deep into the 3 authentication factors: biometrics including FIRE, FRR, and CER, hardware tokens, a rational case forth, and the full Okta 2022 breach analysis. Watch that next video now. Rash future belongs to the prepared. Stay ready.
Well done, Core. I might let you do this more often. Professor Erica signing off.